Picture the internet you know, YouTube, Google, Facebook. Now picture a version underneath it, invisible to search engines, where nothing is off limits. That's the dark web. And for years, its crown jewel was a marketplace called Silk Road, where over $1.2 billion in illegal goods changed hands with just a few clicks. Now picture the person running it. Not a hardened criminal. Not a hacker in a basement. A former Boy Scout. A physics student. A guy his own family described as sweet. Ross Ulbricht built one of the largest criminal empires in history from his laptop, and prosecutors say he didn't stop at drugs. They say he paid hitmen to have people killed. So which is it, small-town boy next door, or ruthless kingpin hiding in plain sight? By the end of this video, you'll have to decide for yourself. Ross Ulbricht wanted to change the world. The problem was, none of his ideas ever seemed to work out. Business after business had gone nowhere, and he was starting to feel like life was simply passing him by. But there was one thing about Ross that never wavered: he was a die-hard libertarian who believed, deeply, that governments had no right to control what people put into their own bodies. To him, the drug war wasn't about protecting people. It was about control. And he wanted no part of it. So he started asking himself a dangerous question: what if there was a place where that control simply didn't exist? The first piece of the answer came in the form of Tor, a browser originally built by the US Navy to make its users completely untraceable online. It was perfect, except for one glaring problem: money. Every payment left a trail. Bank accounts, credit cards, all of it traceable back to a real person. For a while, the idea just sat there, unfinished, until the summer of 2010, when Ross discovered Bitcoin, a currency with no name attached to it at all. Suddenly, the missing piece had arrived. From there, Ross disappeared into his bedroom and started building. But even with the site nearly finished, he ran into a very practical problem: a marketplace with nothing to sell isn't really a marketplace. So he rented an isolated cabin, picked up a beginner's guide to growing mushrooms, and became his own first supplier. To get the word out without exposing himself, Ross went on to drug forums like the Shroomery under a fake identity, a username called Altoid, casually recommending this cool new site he'd supposedly just stumbled across. It worked. Orders started trickling in. And that small, careless username would end up mattering a lot more than he ever imagined. For a while, growth was slow. Then everything changed. A viral Gawker article turned into national news coverage on ABC and NBC, and almost overnight, Silk Road went from underground secret to headline story. Traffic exploded, and so did the range of things being sold. Drugs were one thing. Weapons were another. Julia, increasingly terrified by what her boyfriend had built, confided in her friend Erica. Then, after a bad drug trip, Erica did something that nearly ended everything. She posted publicly on Ross's Facebook wall, writing that she was sure the authorities would love to know about Ross Ulbricht's drug website. For a few horrifying minutes, Ross's entire secret life was one screenshot away from being over. He scrambled to get the post taken down. His relationship with Julia collapsed. And not long after, Ross made a decision: he left the country entirely, spending the following months running a multi-million-dollar criminal empire from the back corners of internet cafes across Southeast Asia, always angling his screen so no one behind him could see what he was doing. Back at his laptop, whether in Bangkok or Bali, the empire kept growing, and so did the headaches. Bugs in the code. Hackers demanding ransoms. Logistics nightmares. Ross began hiring staff, recruiting them straight out of Silk Road's own user base. And true to the free market philosophy that started this whole thing, he refused to police what was actually sold on the platform. Fake IDs. Counterfeit currency. Spyware. At one point, even a listing claiming to sell a human kidney. The marketplace he'd built to set people free from government control was slowly becoming something far harder to control himself. Somewhere in the middle of that chaos, Ross found an unlikely ally, a mysterious, highly experienced user known only as Variety Jones. Part mentor, part business partner, Variety Jones understood the drug trade in ways Ross never had. And he delivered a warning that changed everything. Under U.S. drug kingpin laws, Ross wasn't just risking a prison sentence. He was risking life behind bars, or worse. Variety Jones had a plan, borrowed straight from fiction. In The Princess Bride, the title, Dread Pirate Roberts, isn't held by one man, it's passed down, generation after generation. Ross adopted the name as his own admin alias. The logic was simple: if he was ever caught, he could claim he was merely the current Dread Pirate Roberts, not the man who'd started it all. A layer of deniability, built right into his own identity. By its second year, Silk Road had grown to nearly 1 million users. Ross's personal fortune, almost entirely sitting in Bitcoin, had climbed into the tens of millions of dollars. On a trip to the small island nation of Dominica, he had a strange, dizzying realization: his website, run from a laptop, was now worth more than the entire country he was standing in. But the highs came with brutal lows. News stories occasionally surfaced about teenagers dying after taking synthetic drugs bought directly through Silk Road, a stark, unavoidable reminder that this was no longer just code and Bitcoin. Real people were getting hurt, and Ross was the one who'd built the place where it happened. Meanwhile, the hunt for whoever was really behind Silk Road had been dragging on for years. The FBI and DEA threw everything they had at trying to break through Tor's encryption, with little success. The breakthrough, when it finally came, arrived from somewhere nobody expected: not a cybersecurity expert, not a federal agent with years of dark web experience, but an IRS tax inspector named Gary Alford, who knew almost nothing about cryptocurrency or the dark web. What Gary did have was a theory: every criminal, no matter how careful, leaves behind one small mistake. A digital version of a parking ticket. And he was about to go looking for Ross Ulbricht's. Simultaneously, the FBI located the physical Silk Road server in an Iceland data center due to a leak in Ross's poorly written code. When Gary presented his findings to the elite task force, the room fell dead silent. When Gary mentioned the username, Frosty, an FBI agent cut him off. They had just analyzed the seized Iceland server, the internal name of the database server, and Ross's computer was Frosty. Gary Alford didn't know it yet, but he wasn't the only one closing in. While he'd been quietly digging through old forum posts, a separate team at the FBI had been fighting a very different battle, trying to physically locate the server that powered Silk Road itself. For months, they'd hit wall after wall. Tor was doing exactly what it was designed to do, scrambling any trace of where the site actually lived. Then they caught a break. Buried in Silk Road's clunky, self-taught code, the same code Ross had written alone, at 3 a.m., teaching himself as he went, was a leak. A tiny misconfiguration was quietly bleeding out the site's real IP address, one packet at a time. It was enough. The FBI traced it to a data center thousands of miles away, tucked into the volcanic landscape of Iceland. They had found the body. They just didn't have the name of the killer. So when Gary Alford finally got his call with the Joint Task Force, FBI, DEA, agents from half a dozen agencies who'd spent 2 years chasing a ghost, nobody expected much from the guy on the phone from the IRS. He wasn't a hacker. He didn't speak fluent Bitcoin. He was a tax inspector who read everything 3 times. He started slow. He talked about a username, Altoid, the very first account to ever mention Silk Road online, back before the site had customers, before it had a reputation, before it had a body count. He explained how that same user had, months later, made one small, fatal error, signing off a forum post with a personal Gmail address. Ross Ulbricht's Gmail address. Some of the agents were unimpressed. A username wasn't a conviction. Coincidences happened. Gary kept going anyway. That he mentioned a coding question, posted on a technical forum, about how to route web traffic anonymously, posted under the name Ross Ulbricht, then deleted and reposted seconds later under a different name once the poster seemed to realize his mistake. The new name was Frosty. The room went quiet. One of the FBI agents leaned toward the phone. Say that again. Gary repeated it. Frosty, what Gary didn't know, what nobody outside that Iceland investigation had told him, was that 3 days earlier, agents had finished tearing apart the seized server line by line. And buried deep in its configuration files was an internal hostname, a label the server's own administrator had given it, back when he thought no one but him would ever see it. The server's name was Frosty. 2 completely separate investigations. 2 teams who didn't know the other existed. One had been chasing a server halfway around the world. The other had been chasing a Gmail address and a deleted forum post. Neither had enough on its own to prove anything. But put side by side, on a conference call between agencies that had barely spoken to each other in 2 years, the 2 threads collapsed into a single, unmistakable name. Ross Ulbricht wasn't just connected to Silk Road anymore, Ross Ulbricht was Dread Pirate Roberts, and for the first time in nearly 3 years, the most wanted man on the internet had a face.